Well, hello, folks out there in YouTube land. Got a big show lined up for you, and let's get right on into it. All right, let's pull up the screen here. Ilus, mighty Ilus. They had JP Backwell did a Q&A, and it was a barn burner. It really was. We're going to talk about that quite a bit. Also, we're going to talk about the share lockup being offered and the recent PR release that came out. We're going to go over that a little bit. This is going to be chock full of a lot of stuff. So let's get into the JP Backwell Q&A. And before I get into this, these questions came from the Ilus Discord, which was set up by an individual investor, not by Ilus. And these are some of the very best questions that I've seen come out of a Discord since I've been covering any OTC stocks. These are extremely well-informed, extremely educated questions that have been fully thought out, that most OTC CEOs or managing directors would struggle to answer. And JP does his best. There's only so many things he can say. There are restrictions of what he can talk about. But I was very impressed with the questions that I heard here, and I'm going to go over several that I thought were pretty darn important. But anyway, to the folks at the Discord, y'all did a great job. Just know that. Anyway, let's get into what JP has to say about the first thing. And I want to talk about audits, because audits is very important to me, because I want to be comfortable with the numbers that I see, especially from a penny stock. The fact they're looking to uplist to the OTCQB is a really good sign, and they're pushing the audit. So that tells me they're comfortable with the numbers and they want us to be. So let's look at this first question.
The first question is, we understand from a recent PR that the 2021 financials are being audited. Which CPA firm is doing the audits? So yeah, we announced recently that we appointed AJSH and Co LLP as our auditors. We did so for a number of reasons, but most importantly, because they are registered with the United States Public Company Accounting Oversight Board. So they're PCAOB certified. They're also ISO 9001 certified. From our perspective, it was most important that the auditing firm was certified to audit public companies, number one, obviously, and number two, that they are in the same time zone as our CFO and our finance department. And then also very importantly, number three, that they could deliver the full audit within 60 to 90 days. So to put it simply, that's why we went with AJSH and Co. It's not because their name has a nice ring to it. And yeah, so we've been making good progress with that audit. They've recently been with us in Dubai, and yeah, we're moving forward with that. Good.
All right, so there's your answer on the audit. That's 60 to 90 days, and they're working hard on that and trying to get that all done. The second question that was very interesting to me were about the acquisitions and how they go about it. So let's get into that.
Can you provide the acquisition costs in cash and shares for the companies Ilus acquired in 2021 by company? Also, can this information, in brackets acquisition costs and how they're being funded, be provided in the PRs announcing acquisitions going forward? This is often something that we see presented as a deterrent for investors under the not so subtle accusation that it is impossible for Ilus to be affording all of these acquisitions without taking on mountains of debt or significantly diluting. So the answer to this question is a bit more complicated than one might presume. And so I'll try and summarize why for you. And to do that, let me just first give you a broad idea of how we go about an acquisition. Number one, we will value the business following a period of meetings and due diligence. Number two, we'll make an offer which is normally structured as anything from 30 to 70% of the value of the company to be paid upon closing. So that's when the share purchase agreements are signed. The balance would then be paid 12 months after closing. That's what we call an aggregate payment. And that would be if a company achieves certain targets which we set for them. It could also be over a longer period, depending on the deal complexity. For those who understand mergers and acquisitions, a large acquisition could be structured to be paid over a period of 2 or 3 or even 5 years, provided it meets certain targets like annual turnover targets, etc. So it's similar with us, except that we look to close out an acquisition within 12 months, within that 12-month period, with the bulk of the payment being made upon closing. Again, all of this depends on what will happen, the complexity of the deal, and what would happen after the initial closing. For example, does the existing management of that company stay in place? Do we need to employ certain people for that business to grow it as we would expect? Are they moving into new premises, and are they self-funding that move, or are we investing in that ourselves? What else are we investing, et cetera, and much, much more than that. Now, in some, but not all cases, we may offer some convertible preference shares as a sweetener to the deal. Let me first stress that these are only shares which can be sold after 1 or 2 years, and in most cases, they would be subject to a leak-out clause. Again, in most cases, we're only talking about a few thousand shares here if the seller is really interested in our public company and sees the value in having an Ilus investment as opposed to receiving that as a cash portion. But let me be very clear again that these are preference shares. They cannot be sold in the short term, and even when they can be sold, they can only be sold slowly. So with that background in mind, regarding how a typical acquisition would be structured, or how the purchase of a company would be structured, think of it from a business perspective. If we disclose this information publicly, we then create quite a few problems for ourselves. Let me try and explain further. So firstly, our current acquisitions would know what we paid for the other acquisitions, which is not going to help us at all, or them. Secondly, the staff of those acquisitions know what their managers, who are likely still to be working for the company, got paid. And that's going to create some unnecessary stress and probably some corresponding poorer performance in that workplace. And for example, in the US, where it is such a challenge to find good staff at the moment, that's a bigger risk than you might think. And thirdly, and this is the most important one for me personally and for my acquisitions team, the acquisitions we're in discussions with, in negotiations with, will know what we paid for the other acquisitions. You might have similar revenue, for example. And that's going to prevent us from structuring a deal differently if we wish to do so. And it's probably going to prevent us from getting an overall better deal for Ilus. So, yeah, I think it's important to just think this through from a business perspective, from a business point of view, and it makes a lot more sense. Our focus is growing the business and on squashing the factors which would negatively affect our growth. So that means getting the best deal at the boardroom table for both us and for you, for our shareholders. Just also remember that this is not a means to an end for us, like it could be for many OTC companies and their management teams. We expect this business to keep growing for the long term. And so negotiating deals now, which are going to backfire on all of us collectively later, is not to the benefit of us or anyone involved with Ilus. So I think that would just about answer the question. And the answer is no, at least for the time being, unless something specifically needs to change. But hopefully that explains why that is the case.
All right, so they're not going to be getting into the specifics for obvious reasons that he just discussed, but it pretty well states how they handle it. And like I said, I can understand them wanting to keep that under wraps, because that would be the first thing if I was sitting on the other end of that table. I'd want to know what they paid for the last business that was similar to mine. And then that would be the starting point for my price. I would start there and work up, and I wouldn't let it go below that. And it wouldn't matter if my company wasn't as good, I would still consider it as good, because I would just strictly look at the revenues. So anyway, that was a pretty interesting answer and a great question. And let's see, let's go on to the next thing here. And this is pretty important. This talks about scaling up the businesses, which is their primary focus, and why I think they're going to be building shareholder value, or at least I hope so. So let's get into that.
Can you elaborate on your scale-up plans for Bullhead and Georgia Fire and Rescue Supplies, and any other acquisitions you intend to scale up and for which you already have a plan? Gosh, so if I talk about scale-up plans for the 7 companies we already have, and in general, I think we're going to be here for a very, very long time. That is our priority. That's the bulk of what we do. That's our focus. That's what we spend the majority of our time working on and doing. So I don't know if people actually realize that. I think sometimes people might think we spend a lot of time looking at the share price or worrying about things like that. The reality is this is the priority. This is our focus. It would be a long conversation. And again, it's one I'm happy to focus on in a completely separate Q&A or whatever you'd want it to be. But let me just pick on Georgia Fire and Rescue Supplies and Bullhead, since those are the two that you mentioned, and I'll just mention some things happening pretty much at the moment. So Georgia Fire is about to move into a new facility this month in April, around about the middle of April. It's a much larger facility. They're also going to be exhibiting with us at FDIC in Indianapolis at the end of the month. It's around about the 25th, 26th of this month. And there's also a lot going on to ramp them up in terms of sales in conjunction with them moving into that larger facility. We're going to be doing some training with them soon on our products. When I say our products, I mean the Fireboat products, which they'll then use that training, that information to then go out and do demonstrations on those products themselves. They have 6 members of their sales team, and we're wanting to add more members to their team to give them a stronger nationwide presence. And that would then be in conjunction with other deals and acquisitions we have planned. So we'll be, rolling that out in the coming weeks and months. Bullhead themselves, Bullhead products in Tennessee, they are having a new 15,000 square foot, I think it might even be a bit more than that, up to about 17,000 square foot facility built. And that's going to take around 6 months, according to the builders. So they'll obviously move into that brand new facility when it's ready, and that'll be awesome for them. In the meantime, though, we're adding to their product range along their current lines. There's some products which they can manufacture and sell, which are higher volume selling type products. So we're working on that with them. We're also working on a couple of others in line with our own firefighting products, rapid response vehicles and things like that, plastic vehicles, plastic vehicle bodies. There's a lot going on behind the scenes on that front. We're in the process of looking for a new sales manager for that business and also an additional administration person. So that's a very brief, in a nutshell, sort of recap on what's going on at Georgia Fire and Bullhead. There's a lot more going on the marketing side and in other areas, but hopefully that helps to give you an idea on that front.
All right, and they're talking about scaling up, and I think that's where the investors, myself being one, will see a lot of value when they take a Bullhead or a Georgia Fire and Rescue and increase the size dramatically, increase the revenue with all their connections, and as they turn this into a giant company, they're going to have tentacles all through the world, really, and they'll be able to sell to each other, they'll be able to sell to other companies, and I see this as a scale up that's very important to the synergies and the ability to build up this company, because I think that's where they're going to be able to take something like maybe a Bullhead that has $1 million in revenue and push it to $3 million in revenue because of all the connections they have. And that's why they can afford to go ahead and build a bigger building. Same for Georgia and Fire and Rescue, same deal. All the connections they have, and they can sell through there. They can even sell their own products, because understand they're vertically integrated on a lot of this stuff. Like the Mist Technology nozzles, those can be sold out of Georgia Fire and Rescue all over the country. And I think that's one of the things that they're really trying to do, especially with their EV vehicles they'll be building in Serbia. That's another one that can be built there and then shipped all over the world. And they'll have the connections to make those sales. So pretty interesting. And I think when they buy those companies, of course, they get all that knowledge with it. And that was one of the things they listed. Now let's get into the question about uplisting and spinoffs.
Right, the next question. Per the shareholder meeting PR and January 12th letter, the company will soon be announcing the investment bank, which it will be partnering with for its first planned uplisting. Is there an update on the status of this yet, or is this part of the quiet period? So yes, I must stress that we really can't say much at this point in this regard, other than things are moving forward positively. So if you think about it, the moment we announce an investment bank is the moment we confirm that a spin-out is taking place. And that's not something we can confirm unless there has been an official PR to do so. If such a PR confirming the investment bank was to be published, it would explain exactly how any deal would work and how it would affect the current shareholders. So I think that's really as much as I can say in that regard right now.
Okay, so he's obviously very limited what he can say about spin-offs and spin-outs, but he's kind of in a quiet period, but that's okay. Like I said, he answered the question, and is another very important question. And now he's going to discuss preferred shares and authorized shares.
on to the next question, which is, we regularly see Nick's preferred D shares cited as a deterrent for potential investors, particularly regarding their potential effects on the fully diluted OS should they ever be converted. This topic has been discussed ad nauseum, and we're aware that Nick has advised that he has no intention of converting them. However, and in view of this declaration, it was asked whether Nick would consider moving these preferred shares into a new category of preferred shares that retains voting rights without allowing for conversion. This would have the same poison pill effect and maintain the voting control block Nick currently has without the potential risk, however negligible that risk may be, of a fully diluted OS of over 35 billion. Thanks for clarifying. Some fear that bigger potential shareholders doing their due diligence may see this and shy away from investing, which could hurt our share price long term. So a question similar to this was asked when we had our recent emerging growth conference presentation. So I'll answer it similarly. Firstly, there's only 2 billion shares authorized, and we really have no intention of increasing that any time in the foreseeable future, hopefully ever. So bear that in mind, 2 billion shares authorized, right? There's currently in the region of 1.22 billion shares out as of today's SS updates, which you should have seen. So keep that in mind. Nick is an affiliate of the company. He and other affiliates of the company, like myself, like Louise, are highly regulated by the SEC in terms of what we can and can't do. So under SEC guidelines, and I urge you to go and look at these guidelines if you genuinely are concerned about this, Nick can't just sell shares when he wants to. He just physically couldn't. And I don't think this is often thought through enough or at all. So people just see the shares and they think of the risk, whilst larger institutional investors understand these regulations and they're not concerned about this at all. I'm sure Nick would be willing to sign a leak-out clause that would allow him not to convert too many shares too quickly if this continued to be a concern, or you could do that further down the line. But, really, as one of Nick's closest friends, and I've said this before, I know this is a destination company for him. Our goal is to build a conglomerate over the next 10, 15 years. So I know Nick's got no interest in selling these shares for a long time to come. It's his future generational wealth, and he's spoken many times about building a company that creates generational wealth for all of our shareholders. So I trust that answers that question more than sufficiently for now.
All right, so there he was talking about, of course, the preferred shares and the authorized shares. They say they're never going to go above the 2 billion. And Nick, with his preferred shares, he's already answered that back on April 5th with his letter to the shareholders, which I've covered so many times it's unreal. But anyway, that he has no intentions of selling those. And if he does in the future, I'm sure it will be done in very small tranches because it sounds like he's talking about generational wealth for his family in the future. So I think this is probably what he called a destination company for him, and it sounds like that's what this would be, given his past history and where he's kind of in that age where it's time to make that happen. And lastly, he's talking about Lockup shares, which we'll cover that a little bit more in this little article that came out today. But I know this is going a little bit long, but there's so many great questions in here. This is normally I try to keep my video 6 to 12 minutes, but this is going to be over that. And I know y'all have got to be thinking, surely you can't be serious.
I am serious, and don't call me Shirley.
That's right. I am serious, and don't call me Shirley. Anyway, last question here again, the Lockup shares, and then we'll finish up with the article and then go over the chart.
Right, so I've got a couple of questions here regarding shareholders locking up their shares in a preferred class. It has been mentioned that a preferred class may be created for shareholders to lock up shares. It seems there is a good bit of interest in this from shareholders. So yes, we have mentioned it, and it's great that there's some interest from shareholders. Would there be a minimum number of shares required to do this? What would be the conversion ratio? How would the process work for shareholders? Is it easy to do or more difficult? So look, as with many questions previously, there's not much more I can say about this until we've announced it in an official press release. It is something that we're literally working through right now, right as we speak. And of course, we're going to share more information on it officially as soon as we can. So the information needs to be made available to all shareholders and to interested parties. And so the only official channel we can be doing that through is via a press release. This video is only going to be watched by those who choose to watch it. So effectively, if I give all the answers now in as much as I can, because we are still working through it, it's still not going to be made available to everyone. So we have to do that via a press release, and I hope that you can understand that. I do believe it will be open to all shareholders who register their interest with us. So if an announcement is made via a press release, those who are interested can then click on a link on our websites and fill in their information as required. And of course, it'll be taken from there. At least that's the process right now, as I would understand it.
All right. So it sounds like stay tuned on that, which makes sense. They obviously can't discuss it, but it sounds like it'll be coming out soon enough. But there are a bunch of great questions in there. And again, I'm very impressed with the Discord questions that came out of there. The entire video is excellent. It's about just about an hour. If you've got time to watch it, watch the whole thing. These were just ones that I cherry picked that I thought were very interesting. All right, and here, this is an article that just came out. It's talking about Ilus provides an update on progress and second quarter plans. And a lot of this we've already covered in that Q&A, like the company they're using for the auditing to uplist to the OTCQB, which I'm very happy about that. They talk about the 3 acquisitions they did during the first quarter of 2022, which is pretty impressive, really. Because remember, the first of the year was full of the Rona. They announced their partnership of the European Phase 1 in Serbia. So that's going well. They talked about the Serbian elections where the president was reelected. So that's obviously politically good for the company. They're working on some letters of intent. They're also talking about some big jobs they could be getting in Saudi Arabia at the $500 billion NEOM Smart City project. And they've already got a couple of $1 million projects there for Firebug. So that's pretty impressive there. And I think that's going to be very good for the company. Here they're talking about moving to their big facilities, not only for Georgia Fire and Rescue, but also Bullhead Products. So we discussed that already. And here they get into to offer shareholders the opportunity to lock up shares in a preferred category. Within weeks, the company will release information on the details and incentives for shareholders to lock up their shares. They're obviously trying to get the common shares as low as they possibly can to increase shareholder value. So that's almost a summary of the Q&A, really, in many respects. And also, we had kind of a crappy day in the market because one of the individuals at the Fed, who's kind of a big deal there, she was a dove who went to hawkish on inflation and talking about increasing interest rates and things like that and lowering the balance sheet and things that would take money out of the bank and put it into the Fed's hands, which means less liquidity out there. So there's some things along those lines that really kind of scared the market a little bit. But we had a big day yesterday, and today we had a crap day. But I don't know that Ilus was really affected a whole lot. Let's see. No, it's still at 15 cents, so it hasn't really moved. And a lot of penny stocks, a lot of OTC stocks are doing this. They're just kind of in a holding pattern right now. This is sort of a risk-off environment that we're in, and the market sentiment is sort of down on anything high risk at all, especially OTC stocks. But eventually, I think that will turn when things start continuing to get better. But Ilus is sort of in its own little bubble as far as, it's a company that's making money. So it really shouldn't be put in that category, but unfortunately, that's just the reality of the situation. Otherwise, I think this thing would be moving up. All right, folks, and I just wanted to cover those items. I thought that was a great Q&A, very good. And those are tough questions, man. There's not a lot of OTC stocks that would want to answer all that stuff, but JP did a good job as always. And I thought the share lockup being offered is pretty interesting, and I see that it's good for shareholders. If you like this content, be sure to hit that like button. Lets me know to continue to cover Ilus. And if you haven't subscribed, hit that subscribe button. I'd certainly appreciate it. And hope you did like the content. I'm sorry it was kind of long, and we'll see you next time on Mr. Frugal Investor.